Black Beauty is the story of a horse, as told by the horse itself, who lived in England around the middle of the last century, when horses were still one of the country's chief means of travel and transport. The author, Anna Sewell, described her work as a little book, its special aim being to induce kindness, sympathy, and an understanding treatment of horses. Anna Sewell had a life full of misfortune. Her parents were very poor, and when she was still only a girl, she fell heavily one day when she was on her way home from school. She sprained her ankle badly, and the medical treatment she received was so bad that she remained a cripple for life, never able to walk properly again, and often in great pain. She had, however, a brave and cheerful disposition, and a loyal and loving mother to look after her. Because Anna couldn't walk, she became totally dependent on horses for her travelling, and over the years she developed a deep attachment to them. When she was 50, Miss Sewell became too ill to go out at all. For month after month she lay each day on the sofa in their house in Norwich, and it was then that she began to write her book. Black Beauty was published in 1877. It was an immediate success, but it was to be Anna Sewell's only book. Within a year of its publication, she died.
The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. Some shady trees leaned over it, and rushes and water lilies grew at the deep end. Over the hedge, on one side we looked into a ploughed field, and on the other we looked over a gate at our master's house, which stood by the roadside. At the top of the meadow was a plantation of fir trees, and at the bottom a running brook, overhung by a steep bank. Whilst I was young, I lived upon my mother's milk, as I could not eat grass. In the daytime I ran by her side, and at night I lay down close by her. When it was hot, we used to stand by the pond in the shade of the trees, and when it was cold, we had a nice warm shed near the plantation. As soon as I was old enough to eat grass, my mother used to go out to work in the daytime and came back in the evening. There were 6 young colts in the meadow besides me. They were older than I was. Some were nearly as large as grown-up horses. I used to run with them, and had great fun. We used to gallop all together round and round the field as hard as we could go. Sometimes we had rather rough play, for they would frequently bite and kick as well as gallop. One day, when there was a good deal of kicking, my mother whinnied to me to come to her, and then she said, "I wish you to pay attention to what I'm going to say to you. The colts who live here are very good colts, but they are cart-horse colts, and of course they have not learned manners. You have been well-bred and well-born. Your father has a great name in these parts, and your grandfather won the cup 2 years at the Newmarket races. Your grandmother had the sweetest temper of any horse I ever knew, and I think you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up gentle and good, and never learn bad ways. Do your work with a good will, lift your feet up well when you trot, and never bite or kick, even in play." I have never forgotten my mother's advice. I knew she was a wise old horse, and our master thought a great deal of her. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. Our master was a good, kind man. He gave us good food, good lodging, and kind words. He spoke as kindly to us as he did to his little children. We were all fond of him, and my mother loved him very much. When she saw him at the gate, she would neigh with joy and trot up to him. He would pat and stroke her and say, "Well, old Pet, and how's your little darky?" I was a dull black, so he called me Darky. Then he would give me a piece of bread, which was very good, and sometimes he brought a carrot for my mother. All the horses would come to him, but I think we were his favourites. My mother always took him to the town on a market day in a light gig. There was a ploughboy, Dick, who sometimes came into our field to pluck blackberries from the hedge. When he'd eaten all he wanted, he would have what he called fun with the colts, throwing stones and sticks at them to make them gallop. We did not much mind him, for we could gallop off, but sometimes a stone would hit and hurt us. One day he was at this game, and did not know that the master was in the next field, but he was there, watching what was going on. Over the hedge he jumped in a snap, and catching Dick by the arm, he gave him such a box on the ear as made him roar with the pain and surprise. As soon as we saw the master, we trotted up nearer to see what went on. "Bad boy," he said, "bad boy to chase the colts. This is not the first time nor the second, but it shall be the last. There, take your money and go home. I shall not want you on my farm again." So we never saw Dick any more. Old Daniel, the man who looked after the horses, was just as gentle as our master, so we were well off. I was now beginning to grow handsome. My coat had grown fine and soft and was bright black. I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. I was thought very handsome. My master would not sell me till I was 4 years old. He said lads ought not to work like men, and colts ought not to work like horses till they were quite grown up. When I was 4 years old, Squire Gordon came to look at me. He examined my eyes, my mouth, and my legs. He felt them all down, and then I had to walk and trot and gallop before him. He seemed to like me, and said, "When he's been well broken in, he'll do very well." My master said he would break me in himself, as he should not like me to be frightened or hurt, and he lost no time about it, for the next day he began. Everyone may not know what breaking in is, therefore I will describe it. It means to teach a horse to wear a saddle and bridle, and to carry on his back a man, woman, or child, to go just the way they wish, and to go quietly. Besides this, he has to learn to wear a collar, a crupper, and a breeching, and to stand still whilst they are put on. Then, to have a cart or a chaise fixed behind him, so that he cannot walk or trot without dragging it after him. And he must go fast or slow just as the driver wishes. He must never start at what he sees, nor speak to other horses, nor bite, nor kick, nor have any will of his own, but always do his master's will, even though he may be very tired or hungry. But the worst of all is, when his harness is once on, he may neither jump for joy nor lie down for weariness. So you see, this breaking in is a great thing. I had, of course, long been used to a halter and a headstall, and to be led about in the field and lanes quietly. But now I was to have a bit and a bridle. My master gave me some oats as usual, and after a good deal of coaxing, he got the bit into my mouth and the bridle fixed. But it was a nasty thing. Those who've never had a bit in their mouth cannot think how bad it feels. A great piece of cold, hard steel, as thick as a man's finger, to be pushed into one's mouth between one's teeth and over one's tongue, with the ends coming out at the corner of your mouth, and held fast there by straps, over your head, under your throat, round your nose, and under your chin, so that no way in the world can you get rid of the nasty, hard thing. It is very bad. Yes, very bad. At least I thought so. But I knew my mother always wore one when she went out, and all horses did when they were grown up. And so, what with the nice oats, and what with my master's pats, kind words, and gentle ways, I got to wear my bit and bridle. Next came the saddle. That was not half so bad. My master put it on my back very gently, whilst old Daniel held my head. He then made the girths fast under my body, patting and talking to me all the time. Then I had a few oats, then a little leading about, and this he did every day, till I began to look for the oats and the saddle. At length, one morning, my master got on my back and rode me round the meadow on the soft grass. It certainly did feel queer, but I must say I felt rather proud to carry my master, and as he continued to ride me a little every day, I soon became accustomed to it. The next unpleasant business was putting on the iron shoes. That, too, was very hard at first. My master went with me to the smith's forge to see that I was not hurt or got any fright. The blacksmith took my feet in his hand, one after the other, and cut away some of the hoof. It did not pain me, so I stood still on 3 legs till he had done them all. Then he took a piece of iron, the shape of my foot, and clapped it on, and drove some nails through the shoe quite into my hoof, so that the shoe was firmly on. My feet felt very stiff and heavy, but in time I got used to it. And now, having got so far, my master went on to break me to harness. There were more new things to wear. First, a stiff, heavy collar just on my neck, and a bridle with great side pieces against my eyes called blinkers. And blinkers indeed they were, for I could not see on either side, but only straight in front of me. Next, there was a small saddle with a nasty, stiff strap that went right under my tail. That was the crupper. To have my long tail doubled up and poked through that strap was almost as bad as the bit. I never felt more like kicking, but of course I could not kick such a good master, and so in time I got used to everything, and could do my work as well as my mother. I must not forget to mention one part of my training which I've always considered a very great advantage. My master sent me for a fortnight to a neighbouring farmer's who had a meadow which was skirted on one side by the railway. Here were some sheep and cows, and I was turned in amongst them. I shall never forget the first train that ran by. I was feeding quietly near the pales which separated the meadow from the railway, when I heard a strange sound at a distance, and before I knew whence it came, with a rush and a clatter and a puffing out of smoke, a long black train of something flew by and was gone almost before I could draw my breath. I turned and galloped to the further side of the meadow as fast as I could go, and there I stood, snorting with astonishment and fear. In the course of the day many other trains went by, some more slowly. These drew up at the station close by, and sometimes made an awful shriek and groan before they stopped. I thought it very dreadful, but the cows went on eating very quietly, and hardly raised their heads, as the black frightful thing came puffing and grinding past. For the first few days I could not feed in peace, but as I found that this terrible creature never came into the field, or did me any harm, I began to disregard it. And very soon I cared as little about the passing of a train as the cows and sheep did. Since then I have seen many horses, much alarmed and restive at the sight or sound of a steam engine. But thanks to my good master's care, I am as fearless at railway stations as in my own stable. Now, if anyone wants to break in a young horse, well, that is the way. My master often drove me in double harness with my mother, because she was steady and could teach me how to go better than a strange horse. She told me the better I behaved, the better I should be treated, and that it was wisest always to do my best to please my master. But, said she, there are a great many kinds of men. There are good, thoughtful men like our master, that any horse may be proud to serve. But there are bad, cruel men who never ought to have a horse or dog to call their own. Besides, there are a great many foolish men, vain, ignorant, and careless, who never trouble themselves to think. These spoil more horses than all, just for want of sense. They don't mean it, but they do it for all that. I hope you will fall into good hands. But a horse never knows who may buy him or who may drive him. It is all a chance for us. But still I say, do your best wherever it is, and keep up your good name. At this time I used to stand in the stable, and my coat was brushed every day till it shone like a rook's wing. It was early in May when there came a man from Squire Gordon's who took me away to the hall. My master said, "Goodbye, Darky. Be a good horse, and always do your best." I could not say goodbye, so I put my nose into his hand. He patted me kindly, and I left my first home. As I lived some years with Squire Gordon, I may as well tell something about the place. Squire Gordon's park skirted the village of Birtwick. It was entered by a large iron gate, at which stood the first lodge, and then you trotted along on a smooth road between clumps of large old trees, then another lodge and another gate, which brought you to the house and the gardens. Beyond this lay the home paddock, the old orchard, and the stables. There was accommodation for many horses and carriages, but I need only describe the stable into which I was taken. This was very roomy, with 4 good stalls. A large swinging window opened into the yard, which made it pleasant and airy. The first stall was a large square one, shut in behind with a wooden gate. The others were common stalls, good stalls, but not nearly so large. It had a low rack for hay and a low manger for corn. It was called a loose box, because the horse that was put into it was not tied up, but left loose to do as he liked. It is a great thing to have a loose box. Into this fine box the groom put me. It was clean, sweet, and airy. I never was in a better box than that, and the sides were not so high but that I could see all that went on through the iron rails that were at the top. He gave me some very nice oats, he patted me, spoke kindly, and then went away. When I had eaten my corn, I looked round. In the stall next to mine stood a little fat grey pony with a thick mane and tail, a very pretty head, and a pert little nose. I put my head up to the iron rails at the top of my box and said, "How do you do? What is your name?" He turned round as far as his halter would allow, held up his head and said, "My name is Merrylegs. I'm very handsome. I carry the young ladies on my back, and sometimes I take our mistress out in the low chair. They think a great deal of me, and so does James. Are you going to live next door to me in the box?" I said yes. "Ah, well then," he said, "I hope you are good-tempered. I do not like anyone next door who bites." Just then a horse's head looked over from the stall beyond. The ears were laid back, and the eye looked rather ill-tempered. This was a tall chestnut mare, with a long, handsome neck. She looked across to me and said, "Sir, it is you who have turned me out of my box. It is a very strange thing for a colt like you to come and turn a lady out of her own home." "I beg your pardon," I said. "I have turned no one out. The man who brought me put me here, and I had nothing to do with it. And as to my being a colt, I'm turned 4 years old, and I'm a grown-up horse. I never had words yet with horse or mare, and it is my wish to live at peace." "Well," she said, "we shall see. Of course, I do not want to have words with a young thing like you." I said no more. In the afternoon, when she went out, Merrylegs told me all about it. "The thing is this," said Merrylegs. "Ginger has a bad habit of biting and snapping. That's why they call her Ginger. And when she was in the loose box, she used to snap very much. One day she bit James in the arm and made it bleed, and so Miss Flora and Miss Jessie, who were very fond of me, were afraid to come into the stable. They used to bring me nice things to eat, an apple or a carrot or pieces of bread. But after Ginger stood in that box, they dare not come, and I missed them very much. I hope they will now come again, if you do not bite or snap." I told him I never bit anything but grass, hay, and corn, and could not think what pleasure Ginger found in it. "Oh, well, I don't think she does find pleasure," says Merrylegs. "It is just a bad habit. She says no one was ever kind to her, and why should she not bite? Of course, it is a very bad habit. But I am sure if all she says be true, she must have been very ill-used before she came here. John does all he can to please her, and James does all he can, and our master never uses a whip if a horse acts right. So I think she might be good-tempered here. You see," he said with a wise look, I'm 12 years old. I know a great deal, and I can tell you there is not a better place for a horse all round the country than this. John is the best groom that ever was. He's been here 14 years, and you never saw such a kind boy as James is. So that it is all Ginger's own fault that she did not stay in that box. The name of the coachman was John Manley. He had a wife and one little child, and they lived in the coachman's cottage very near the stables. The next morning he took me into the yard and gave me a good grooming, and just as I was going into my box, with my coat soft and bright, the squire came in to look at me, and seemed pleased. "John," he said, "I meant to have tried the new horse this morning, but I have other business. You may as well take him around after breakfast. Go by the common and the high wood, and back by the watermill and the river. That will show his paces." "I will, sir," said John. After breakfast he came and fitted me with a bridle. He was very particular in letting out and taking in the straps to fit my head comfortably. Then he brought a saddle, but it was not broad enough for my back. He saw it in a minute and went for another, which fitted nicely. He rode me first slowly, then a trot, then a canter, and when we were on the common he gave me a light touch with his whip, and we had a splendid gallop. "Ha, ha, my boy," he said as we pulled me up. "You'd like to follow the hounds, I think." As we came back through the park, we met the squire and Mrs. Gordon walking. They stopped, and John jumped off. "Well, John, how does he go, "First rate, sir," answered John. "He's as fleet as a deer, and has a fine spirit, too, but the lightest touch of the rein will guide him. Down at the end of the common we met one of those travelling carts hung all over with baskets, rugs, and such like. You know, so many horses will not pass those carts quietly. He just took a good look at it, and then went on, as quiet and pleasant as could be. They were shooting rabbits near the high wood, and a gun went off close by. He pulled up a little and looked, but did not stir a step to right or left. I just held the rein steady and did not hurry him, and it's my opinion he's not been frightened or ill-used while he was young." "That's well," said the squire. "I will try him myself tomorrow." The next day I was brought up for my master. I remembered my mother's counsel and my good old master's, and I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. I found he was a very good rider, and thoughtful for his horse, too. When we came home, the lady was at the hall door as he rode up. "Well, my dear," she said, "how do you like him?" "He's exactly what John said," he replied. "A pleasanter creature I never wish to mount. What should we call him, "Would you like Ebony?" said she. "He's as black as ebony." No, not Ebony, no." "Well, will you call him Blackbird, like your uncle's old horse?" No, he's far handsomer than old Blackbird ever was." "Yes," she said, "he is really quite a beauty, and he has such a sweet, good-tempered face and such a fine, intelligent eye. What do you say to calling him Black Beauty?" "Black Beauty? Ah, yes, I think that's a very good name. If you like, it shall be his name." And so it was. I was quite happy in my new place, and if there was one thing that I missed, it must not be thought I was discontented. All who had to do with me were good, and I had a light, airy stable, and the best of food. What more could I want? Why, liberty. For 3 years and a half of my life, I had had all the liberty I could wish for. But now, week after week, month after month, and no doubt year after year, I must stand up in a stable night and day, except when I am wanted. And then I must be just as steady and quiet as any old horse who has worked 20 years. Straps here and straps there, a bit in my mouth, and blinkers over my eyes. Now, I am not complaining, for I know it must be so. I only mean to say that, for a young horse, full of strength and spirits, who has been used to some large field or plain, where he can fling up his head and toss up his tail and gallop away at full speed, then round and back again with a snort to his companions, I say it is hard never to have a bit more liberty to do as you like. Sometimes, when I've had less exercise than usual, I have felt so full of life and spring that when John has taken me out to exercise, I really could not keep quiet. Do what I would, it seemed as if I must jump or dance or prance, and many a good shake I know I must have given him, especially at the first. But he was always good and patient. "Steady, steady, my boy," he would say. "Wait a bit, and we'll have a good swing and soon get the tickle out of your feet." Then, as soon as we were out of the village, he would give me a few miles at a spanking trot, and then bring me back as fresh as before, only clear of the fidgets, as he called them. Spirited horses, when not enough exercise, are often called skittish when it is only play, and some grooms will punish them, but our John did not. He knew it was only high spirits. Still, he had his own ways of making me understand, by the tone of his voice or the touch of the rein. If he was very serious and quite determined, I always knew it by his voice, and that had more power with me than anything else, for I was very fond of him. I ought to say that sometimes we had our liberty for a few hours. This used to be on fine Sundays in the summer-time. The carriage never went out on Sundays, because the church was not far off. It was a great treat to us to be turned out into the home paddock or the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet, the air so sweet, and the freedom to do as we liked was so pleasant. To gallop, to lie down and roll over on our backs, or to nibble the sweet grass. Then it was a very good time for talking, as we stood together under the shade of the large chestnut tree. One day, late in the autumn, my master had a long journey to go on business. I was put into the dog-cart, and John went with his master. I always liked to go in the dog-cart. It was so light, and the high wheels ran along so pleasantly. There had been a great deal of rain, and now the wind was very high, and blew the dry leaves across the road in a shower. We went along merrily till we came to the toll bar and the low wooden bridge. The river banks were rather high, and the bridge, instead of rising, went across just level, so that in the middle, if the river was full, the water would be nearly up to the woodwork and planks. But as there were good substantial rails on each side, people did not mind it. The man at the gate said the river was rising fast, and he feared it would be a bad night. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road the water was halfway up to my knees. The bottom was good, and master drove gently, so it was no matter. When we got to the town, of course, I had a good meal, but as the master's business engaged him a long time, we did not start for home till rather late in the afternoon. The wind was then much higher, and I heard the master say to John he'd never been out in such a storm. And so I thought, as we went along the skirts of a wood where the great branches were swaying about like twigs, and the rushing sound was terrible. "I wish we were well out of this wood," said my master. "Yes, sir," said John. "It would be rather awkward if one of these branches came down upon us." The words were scarcely out of his mouth when there was a groan and a crack and a splitting sound, and tearing, crashing down amongst the other trees came an oak, torn up by the roots, and it fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still, and I believe I trembled. Of course I did not turn round or run away. I was not brought up to that. John jumped out and was in a moment at my head. "That was a very near touch," said my master. "What's to be done now?" "Well, sir, we can't drive over that tree nor yet round it. There'll be nothing for it but to go back to the 4 crossways, and that'll be a good 6 miles before we get round to the wooden bridge again. It will make us late, but the horse is fresh." So back we went, and round by the crossroads. But by the time we got to the bridge, it was very nearly dark. We could just see that the water was over the middle of it. But as that happened sometimes when the floods were out, Master did not stop. We were going along at a good pace, but the moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge, I felt sure there was something wrong. I dare not go forward, and I made a dead stop. "Go on, Beauty," said my master, and he gave me a touch with the whip. But I dare not stir. He gave me a sharp cut. I jumped, but I dare not go forward. "There's something wrong, sir," said John, and he sprang out of the dog-cart and came to my head and looked all about. He tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty, come on, what's the matter?" Of course I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then the man at the toll-gate on the other side ran out of the house, tossing a torch about like one mad. "Oi, oi, oi, halloo, stop!" he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it's carried away. If you come on, you'll be into the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You beauty," said John, and took the bridle and gently turned me round to the right-hand road by the riverside. The sun had set some time. The wind seemed to have lulled off after that furious blast which tore up the tree. It grew darker and darker, stiller and stiller. I trotted quietly along, the wheels hardly making a sound on the soft road. For a good while neither Master nor John spoke, and then Master began in a serious voice. I could not understand much of what they said, but I found they thought if I had gone on as the Master wanted me, most likely the bridge would have given way under us, and horse, chaise, master, and man would have fallen into the river. And as the current was flowing very strongly, and there was no light and no help at hand, it was more than likely we should all have been drowned. Master said God had given men reason by which they could find out things for themselves, but he had given animals knowledge which did not depend on reason, and which was much more prompt and perfect in its way, and by which they had often saved the lives of men. After this, it was decided by my master and mistress to pay a visit to some friends who lived about 46 miles from our home, and James was to drive them. The first day we travelled 32 miles. There were some long, heavy hills, but James drove so carefully and thoughtfully that we were not at all harassed. He never forgot to put on the drag as we went downhill, nor to take it off at the right place. He kept our feet on the smoothest part of the road, and if the uphill was very long, he set the carriage wheels a little across the road so as not to run back, and gave us a breathing. Now, all these little things help a horse very much, particularly if he gets kind words into the bargain. We stopped once or twice on the road, and just as the sun was going down, we reached the town where we were to spend the night. We stopped at the principal hotel, which was in the marketplace. It was a very large one. We drove under an archway into a long yard, at the further end of which were the stables and coach-houses. 2 ostlers came to take us out. The head ostler was a pleasant, active little man, with a crooked leg and a yellow striped waistcoat. I never saw a man unbuckle harness so quickly as he did, and with a pat and a good word he led me to a long stable with 6 or 8 stalls in it and 2 or 3 horses. The other man brought Ginger. James stood by whilst we were rubbed down and cleaned. Later on in the evening, a traveller's horse was brought in by the second ostler, and while he was cleaning him, a young man with a pipe in his mouth lounged into the stable to gossip. "I say, Towler," said the ostler, "just run up the ladder into the loft and put some hay down into this horse's rack, will you? Only lay down your pipe." "All right," said the other, and went up through the trap-door, and I heard him step across the floor overhead and put down the hay. James came in to look at us the last thing, and then the door was locked. I cannot say how long I had slept, nor what time in the night it was, but I woke up very uncomfortable, though I hardly knew why. I got up. The air seemed all thick and choking. I heard Ginger coughing, and one of the other horses moved about restlessly. It was quite dark, and I could see nothing, but the stable was very full of smoke, and I hardly knew how to breathe. The trap-door had been left open, and I thought that was the place it came through. I listened, and heard a soft, rushing sort of noise, and a low crackling and snapping. I did not know what it was, but there was something in the sound so strange that it made me tremble all over. The other horses were now all awake. Some were pulling at their halters, others were stamping. At last I heard steps outside, and the ostler who had put up the traveller's horse burst into the stable with a lantern and began to untie the horses and try to lead them out. But he seemed in such a hurry, and so frightened himself, that he frightened me still more. The first horse would not go with him. He tried the second and third. They too would not stir. He came to me next and tried to drag me out of the stall by force. Well, of course that was no use. He tried us all by turns and then left the stable. No doubt we were very foolish, but danger seemed to be all round, and there was nobody we knew to trust in, and all was strange and uncertain. The fresh air that had come in through the open door made it easier to breathe, but the rushing sound overhead grew louder, and as I looked upward, through the bars of my empty rack, I saw a red light flickering on the wall. And then I heard a cry of fire outside, and the old ostler quietly and quickly came in. He got one horse out and went to another, but the flames were playing round the trapdoor, and the roaring overhead was dreadful. The next thing I heard was James's voice, quiet and cheery as it always was. "Come, my beauties, come on, it's time for us to be off, so wake up and come along." I stood nearest the door, so he came to me first, patting me as he came in. "Come on, beauty, on with your bridle, my boy. We'll soon be out of this smother." It was on in no time. Then he took the scarf off his neck and tied it lightly over my eyes, and patting and coaxing he led me out of the stable. Safe in the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Here, somebody, take this horse while I go back for the other." A tall, broad man stepped forward and took me, and James darted back into the stable. I set up a shrill whinny as I saw him go. And Ginger told me afterwards that whinny was the best thing I could have done for her, for had she not heard me outside, she would never have had courage to come out. There was much confusion in the yard, the horses being got out of other stables, and the carriages and gigs being pulled out of houses and sheds, lest the flames should spread further. On the other side of the yard, windows were thrown up, and people were shouting all sorts of things. But I kept my eye fixed on the stable door, where the smoke poured out thicker than ever, and I could see flashes of red light. Presently I heard, above all the stir and din, a loud, clear voice which I knew was Master's. "James Howard! James Howard, are you there?" There was no answer, but I heard a crash of something falling in the stable, and the next moment I gave a loud, joyful neigh, for I saw James coming through the smoke, leading Ginger with him. She was coughing violently, and he was not able to speak. "Pah, aye, brave lad," said master, laying his hand on his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" James shook his head, for he could not yet speak. "Aye," said the big man who held me, "he is a brave lad, and no mistake." "And now," said master, "when you've got your breath, James, we'll get out of this place as quickly as we can." And we were moving towards the entry, when from the marketplace there came a sound of galloping feet and loud rumbling wheels. "'Tis the fire engine! The fire engine!" shouted 2 or 3 voices. Stand back! Make way!" And clattering and thundering over the stones, 2 horses dashed into the yard with a heavy engine behind them. The fireman leapt to the ground. There was no need to ask where the fire was. It was torching up in a great blaze from the roof. We got out as fast as we could into the broad, quiet marketplace. The stars were shining, and, except the noise behind us, all was still.
So far in his life, Black Beauty has been lucky in having good masters and good grooms to look after him. Now, though, his master has to leave Birtwick Park and sell the horses. Black Beauty and his friend Ginger are bought by an earl, and for a while they're well treated by his head coachman, Mr. York, at their new home, Earl's Hall Park. It's here, however, that Black Beauty's fortunes take a sudden turn for the worse.
I must now say a little about Reuben Smith, who was left in charge of the stables when York went to London. No one more thoroughly understood his business than he did, and when he was all right, there could not be a more faithful or valuable man. He was gentle and very clever in his management of horses, and could doctor them almost as well as a farrier, for he had lived 2 years with a veterinary surgeon. He was a first-rate driver. He could take a 4-in-hand or a tandem as easily as a pair. He was a handsome man, a good scholar, and had very pleasant manners. I believe everybody liked him. Certainly the horses did. The only wonder was that he should be in an under situation, and not in the place of a head coachman like York. But he had one great fault, and that was the love of drink. He was not like some men, always at it. He used to keep steady for weeks or months together, and then he would break out and have a bout of it, as York called it, and be a disgrace to himself, a terror to his wife, and a nuisance to all that had to do with him. It was now early in April, and the family was expected home sometime in May. The light brougham was to be freshly done up, and as Colonel Blantyre was obliged to return to his regiment, it was arranged that Smith should drive him to the town in it and ride back. For this purpose he took the saddle with him, and I was chosen for the journey. At the station the colonel put some money into Smith's hand and bid him good-bye. We left the carriage at the maker's, and Smith rode me to the White Lion and ordered the ostler to feed me well and have me ready for him at 4 o'clock. A nail in one of my front shoes had started as I came along, but the ostler did not notice it till just about 4 o'clock. Smith did not come into the yard till 5, and then he said he should not leave till 6, as he had met with some old friends. The man then told him of the nail, and asked if he should have the shoe looked to. "Oh, no," said Smith. "No, that'll be all right till we get home." He spoke in a very loud, off-hand way, and I thought it very unlike him not to see about loose nails in our shoes. He did not come at 6, nor 7, nor 8, and it was nearly 9 o'clock before he called for me, and then it was with a loud, rough voice. He seemed in a very bad temper, and abused the ostler, though I could not tell what for. The landlord stood at the door and said, "Have a care, Mr. Smith." But he answered angrily with an oath, and almost before he was out of the town he began to gallop, frequently giving me a sharp cut with his whip, though I was going at full speed. The moon had not yet risen, and it was very dark. The roads were stony, having been recently mended. Going over them at this pace, my shoe became looser, and when we were near the turnpike gate it came off. If Smith had been in his right senses, he would have been sensible of something wrong in my pace, but he was too madly drunk to notice anything. Beyond the turnpike was a long piece of road upon which fresh stones had just been laid, large, sharp stones, over which no horse could be driven quickly without risk of danger. Over this road, with one shoe gone, I was forced to gallop at my utmost speed, my rider meanwhile cutting into me with his whip, and with wild curses urging me to go still faster. Of course my shoeless foot suffered dreadfully. The hoof was broken and split down to the very quick, and the inside was terribly cut by the sharpness of the stones. This could not go on. No horse could keep his footing under such circumstances. The pain was too great. I stumbled and fell with violence on both my knees. Smith was flung off by my fall, and owing to the speed I was going at, he must have fallen with great force. I soon recovered my feet and limped to the side of the road where it was free from stones. The moon had just risen above the hedge, and by its light I could see Smith lying a few yards beyond me. He did not rise. He made one slight effort to do so, and then there was a heavy groan. I could have groaned too, for I was suffering intense pain, both from my foot and knees. But horses are used to bear their pain in silence. I uttered no sound, but I stood there and listened. One more heavy groan from Smith. But though he now lay in the full moonlight, I could see no motion. I could do nothing for him nor myself, but, oh, how I listened for the sound of horse or wheels or footsteps. The road was not much frequented, and at this time of the night we might stay for hours before help came to us. I stood watching and listening. It was a calm, sweet April night. There were no sounds but a few lone notes of a nightingale, and nothing moved but the white clouds near the moon and a brown owl that flitted over the hedge. It made me think of the summer nights long ago, when I used to lie beside my mother in the green, pleasant meadow at Farmer Gray's. It must have been nearly midnight when I heard at a great distance the sound of a horse's feet. Sometimes the sound died away, then it grew clearer again and nearer. The road to Earl's Hall led through plantations that belonged to the Earl. The sound came in that direction, and I hoped it might be someone coming in search of us. As the sound came nearer and nearer, I was almost sure I could distinguish Ginger's step. A little nearer still, and I could tell she was in the dog-cart. I neighed loudly, and was overjoyed to hear an answering neigh from Ginger, and men's voices. They came slowly over the stones, and stopped at the dark figure that lay upon the ground. One of the men jumped out and stooped down over it. "It's Reuben," he said, "and he does not stir." The other man followed and bent over him. "He's dead," he said. "Feel how cold his hands are." They raised him up, but there was no life, and his hair was soaked with blood. They laid him down again and came and looked at me. They soon saw my cut knees. The horse has been down and thrown him. Who would have thought the black horse would have done that? Nobody thought he could fall. Reuben must have been lying here for hours. Odd, too, the horse has not moved from the place. The other man, Robert his name was, he was the groom, attempted to lead me forward. I made a step, but almost fell again. Hallo, hallo. Now he's bad in his foot as well as his knees. Look here, you see? His hoof's cut all to pieces. He might well come down, poor fellow. I tell you what, Ned, I'm afraid it hasn't been all right with Reuben. Just think of him riding a horse over these stones without a shoe. Why, if he'd been in his right senses, he'd just as soon have tried to ride him over the moon. I'm afraid it's been the old thing over again. Poor Susan. She looked awful pale when she came to my house to ask if he'd not come home. She made believe she was not a bit anxious and talked of a lot of things that might have kept him. But for all that, she begged me to go and meet him. Now, what must we do, eh? There's the horse to get home as well as the body, and that'll be no easy matter, huh? Then followed a conversation between them, till it was agreed that Robert, as the groom, should lead me, and that Ned must take the body. It was a hard job to get it into the dog-cart, for there was no one to hold Ginger. But she knew as well as I did what was going on, and stood still as a stone. I noticed that because, if she had a fault, it was that she was impatient in standing. Ned started off very slowly with his sad load, and Robert came and looked at my foot again. Then he took his handkerchief and bound it closely round, and so he led me home. I shall never forget that night walk. It was more than 3 miles. Robert led me on very slowly, and I limped and hobbled on as well as I could, with great pain. I'm sure that he was sorry for me, for he often patted and encouraged me, talking to me in a pleasant voice. At last I reached my own box and had some corn, and after Robert had wrapped up my knees in wet cloths, he tied up my foot in a bran poultice to draw out the heat and cleanse it before the horse doctor saw it in the morning. And I managed to get myself down on the straw and slept, in spite of the pain. The next day, after the farrier had examined my wounds, he said he hoped the joint was not injured, and if so, I should not be spoiled for work, but I should never lose the blemish. I believe they did the best to make a good cure, but it was a long and painful one. Proud flesh, as they call it, came up in my knees, and was burnt out with caustic, and when at last it was healed, they put a blistering fluid over the front of both knees to bring all the hair off. They had some reason for this, and I suppose it was all right. As Smith's death had been so sudden, and no one was there to see it, there was an inquest held. The landlord and ostler of the White Lion, with several other people, gave evidence that he was intoxicated when he started from the inn. The keeper of the toll gate said he rode at a hard gallop through the gate, and my shoe was picked up amongst the stones, so that the case was quite plain to them, and I was cleared of all blame. Everybody pitied Susan. She was nearly out of her mind. She kept saying over and over again, "Oh, he was so good, so good. It was all that cursed drink. Why will they sell that cursed drink? Oh, Reuben, Reuben." So she went on till after he was buried. And then, as she had no home or relations, she, with her 6 little children, were obliged once more to leave the pleasant home by the tall oak trees and go into that great, gloomy Union House.
Black Beauty is not handsome enough now for the Earl's carriages, so he has to go for sale. He's bought by a livery stable in Bath and finds himself hired out by the day so that he's driven by many different kinds of men, some good and thoughtful, but many of them brutal or thoughtless or foolish. Then, once again, Black Beauty goes to be sold.
No doubt a horse fair is a very amusing place to those who have nothing to lose. At any rate, there is plenty to see. Long strings of young horses out of the country, fresh from the marshes, and droves of shaggy little Welsh ponies no higher than Merrylegs, and hundreds of cart horses of all sorts, some of them with their long tails braided up and tied with scarlet cord, and a good many like myself, handsome and high-bred, but fallen into the middle class through some accident or blemish, unsoundness of wind, or some other complaint. There were some splendid animals quite in their prime and fit for anything. They were throwing out their legs and showing off their paces in high style as they were trotted out with a leading rein, the groom running by the side. But round in the background there were a number of poor things, sadly broken down with hard work, with their knees knuckling over and their hind legs swinging out at every step. And there were some very dejected-looking old horses, with the underlip hanging down and the ears laying back heavily, as if there were no more pleasure in life and no more hope. There were some so thin you might see all their ribs, and some with old sores on their backs and hips. These were sad sights for a horse to look upon. Who knows not but he may come to the same state? There was a great deal of bargaining, of running up and beating down. And if a horse may speak his mind so far as he understands, I should say there were more lies told and more trickery at that horse fair than a clever man could give an account of. I was put with 2 or 3 other strong, useful-looking horses, and a good many people came to look at us. The gentlemen always turned from me when they saw my broken knees, though the man who had me swore it was only a slip in the stall. The first thing was to pull my mouth open and to look at my eyes, then feel all the way down my legs and give me a hard feel of the skin and flesh, and then try my paces. It was wonderful what a difference there was in the way these things were done. Some did it in a rough, off-hand way, as if one was only a piece of wood, while others would take their hands gently over one's body, with a pat now and then, as much as to say, by your leave. Of course, I judged a good deal of the buyers by their manners to myself. There was one man, I thought. If he would buy me, I should be happy. He was not a gentleman, nor yet one of the loud, flashy sort that call themselves so. He was rather a small man, but well-made and quick in all his motions. I knew in a moment, by the way he handled me, that he was used to horses. He spoke gently, and his grey eye had a kindly, cheery look in it. It may seem strange to say, but it is true all the same, that the clean, fresh smell there was about him made me take to him. No smell of old beer and tobacco, which I hated, but a fresh smell, as if he'd come out of a hayloft. He offered £23 for me, but that was refused, and he walked away. I looked after him, but he was gone, and a very hard-looking, loud-voiced man came. I was dreadfully afraid he would have me, but he walked off. 1 or 2 more came who did not mean business. Then the hard-faced man came back again and offered £23. A very close bargain was being driven, for my salesman began to think he should not get all he asked and was come down. But just then the grey-eyed man came back again. I could not help reaching out my head towards him. He stroked my face kindly. "Well, old chap," he said, "I think we should suit each other. I'll give 24 for him." "Say 25 and you shall have him." 24.10, said my friend in a very decided tone, "and not another 6pence, yes or no?" "Done," said the salesman, "and you may depend upon it, there's a monstrous deal of quality in that horse, and if you want him for cab work, he's a bargain." The money was paid on the spot, and my new master took my halter and led me out of the fair to an inn, where he had a saddle and bridle ready. He gave me a good feed of oats, and stood by whilst I ate it, talking to himself and talking to me. Half an hour after, we were on our way to London, through pleasant lanes and country roads, until we came into the great London thoroughfare, on which we travelled steadily, till in the twilight we reached the great city. The gas lamps were already lighted. There were streets to the right and streets to the left, and streets crossing each other for mile upon mile. I thought we should never come to an end of them. We soon turned up one of the side streets, and about halfway up that, we turned into a very narrow street with rather poor-looking houses on one side and what seemed to be coach houses and stables on the other. My owner pulled up at one of the houses and whistled. The door flew open, and a young woman, followed by a little girl and boy, ran out. There was a very lively greeting as my rider dismounted. "Now then, Harry, me boy, open the gates, and Mother'll bring us a lantern." The next minute they were all standing round me in a small stable yard. "Is he gentle, father?" "Yeah, Dolly, as gentle as your own kitten. Come and pet him." At once the little hand was patting about all over my shoulder without fear. How good it felt. "Let me get him a bran mash while you rub him down," said the mother. "You do, Polly, do. It's just what he wants. And I know you've got a beautiful mash ready for me." The first week of my life as a cab horse was very trying. I'd never been used to London, and the noise, the hurry, the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages that I had to make my way through made me feel anxious and harassed. But I soon found that I could perfectly trust my driver, and then I made myself easy and got used to it. Jerry was as good a driver as I'd ever known, and what was better, he took as much thought for his horses as he did for himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best, and he never laid the whip on me, unless it was gently drawing the end of it over my back when I was to go on. But generally I knew this quite well by the way in which he took up the reins, and I believe his whip was more frequently stuck up by his side than in his hand. One day, whilst our cab and many others were waiting outside one of the parks where a band was playing, a shabby old cab drove up beside ours. The horse was an old, worn-out chestnut, with an ill-kept coat and bones that showed plainly through it. The knees knuckled over, and the forelegs were very unsteady. I'd been eating some hay, and the wind rolled a little lock of it that way, and the poor creature put out her long, thin neck and picked it up, and then turned round and looked about for more. There was a hopeless look in the dull eye that I could not help noticing. And then, as I was thinking where I had seen that horse before, she looked full at me and said, "Black Beauty, is that you?" It was Ginger. But how changed! The beautifully arched and glossy neck was now straight and lank and fallen in. The clean, straight legs and delicate fetlocks were swelled. The joints were grown out of shape with hard work. The face that was once so full of spirit and life was now full of suffering, and I could tell by the heaving of her sides and her frequent cough how bad her breath was. Our drivers were standing together a little way off, so I sidled up to her a step or two that we might have a quiet talk. It was a sad tale that she had to tell. She'd had a bad accident. After a 12-month run-off, she was considered to be fit for work again and was sold to a gentleman. For a little while she got on very well, but after a longer gallop than usual, the old strain returned, and after being rested and doctored, she was again sold. In this way she changed hands several times, but always getting lower down. "And so at last," said she, "I was bought by a man who keeps a number of cabs and horses and lets them out. You look well off, and I am glad of it, but I could not tell you what my life has been. When they found out my weakness, they said I was not worth what they gave for me, and that I must go into one of the low cabs and just be used up. That is what they are doing, whipping and working, with never one thought of what I suffer. They paid for me and must get it out of me, they say. The man who hires me now pays a deal of money to the owner every day, and so he has to get it out of me too. And so it's all the week round and round, with never a Sunday rest. I said, you used to stand up for yourself if you were ill-used. Ah, she said, I did once. But it's no use. Men are strongest. And if they are cruel and have no feeling, there is nothing that we can do but just bear it, on and on to the end. I wish the end was come. I wish I was dead. I've seen dead horses, and I'm sure they do not suffer pain. I wish I may drop down dead at my work, and not be sent off to the knackers. I was very much troubled, and I put my nose up to hers, but I could say nothing to comfort her. I think she was pleased to see me, for she said, "You are the only friend I ever had." Just then her driver came up and with a tug at her mouth backed her out of the line and drove off, leaving me very sad indeed. Christmas and the New Year are very merry times for some people, but for cabmen and cabmen's horses it is no holiday, though it may be a harvest. There are so many parties, balls, and places of amusement open that the work is hard and often late. Sometimes driver and horse have to wait for hours in the rain or frost, shivering with cold, whilst the merry people within are dancing away to the music. I wonder if the beautiful ladies ever think of the weary cabman waiting on his box, and his patient beast standing till his legs get stiff with cold. I had now most of the evening work, as I was well accustomed to standing. We had a great deal of late work in the Christmas week, and Jerry's cough was bad. But however late we were, Polly set up for him, and came out with a lantern to meet him, looking anxious and troubled. On the evening of the New Year, we had to take 2 gentlemen to a house in one of the West End squares. We set them down at 9 o'clock, and were told to come again at 11. "But," said one of them, "as it is a card party, you may have to wait a few minutes. But don't be late." As the clock struck 11, we were at the door, for Jerry was always punctual. The clock chimed the quarters. 1, 2, 3, and then struck 12, but the door did not open. The wind had been very changeable, with squalls of rain during the day, but now it came on a sharp, driving sleet, which seemed to come all the way round. It was very cold, and there was no shelter. Jerry got off his box and came and pulled one of my cloths a little more over my neck. Then he took a turn or two up and down, stamping his feet. Then he began to beat his arms, but that set him off coughing. So he opened the cab door and sat at the bottom with his feet on the pavement, and was a little sheltered. Still the clock chimed the quarters, and no one came. At 12:30, he rang the bell and asked the servant if he would be wanted that night. "Oh, yes, you'll be wanted safe enough," said the man. "You must not go, it will soon be over." And again Jerry sat down, but his voice was so hoarse I could hardly hear him. At 1:15, the door opened and the 2 gentlemen came out. They got into the cab without a word, and told Jerry where to drive. That was nearly 2 miles. My legs were numb with cold, and I thought I should have stumbled. When the men got out, they never said they were sorry to have kept us waiting so long, but were angry at the charge. However, as Jerry never charged more than was his due, so he never took less, and they had to pay for the 2 hours and a quarter waiting, but it was hard-earned money to Jerry. At last we got home. He could hardly speak, and his cough was dreadful. Polly asked no questions, but opened the door and held the lantern for him. "Can't I do something?" she said. "Yes. Get the horse something warm, and then boil me some gruel." This was said in a hoarse whisper. He could hardly get his breath. But he gave me a rub down as usual, and even went up into the hayloft for an extra bundle of straw for my bed. Polly brought me a warm mash that made me comfortable, and then they locked the door. It was late the next morning before anyone came, and then it was only Harry. He cleaned us and fed us and swept out the stalls. Then he put the straw back again as if it was Sunday. He was very still, and neither whistled nor sang. At noon he came again and gave us our food and water. This time Dolly came with him. She was crying, and I could gather from what they said that Jerry was dangerously ill, and the doctor said it was a bad case.
Although Jerry makes a fair recovery, in the end he has to give up cab driving. So Black Beauty is sold again, this time to another cabby who's not so kind to his horses.
I shall never forget my new master. He had black eyes and a hooked nose, his mouth was as full of teeth as a bulldog's, and his voice was as harsh as the grinding of cartwheels over gravel stones. His name was Nicholas Skinner. I've heard men say that seeing is believing, but I should say that feeling is believing. For much as I had seen before, I never knew till now the utter misery of a cab horse's life. Skinner had a low set of cabs and a low set of drivers. He was hard on the men, and the men were hard on the horses. In this place we had no Sunday rest, and it was in the heat of summer. Sometimes on a Sunday morning a party of fast men would hire the cab for the day, 4 of them inside and another with the driver, and I had to take them 10 or 15 miles out into the country and back again. Never would any of them get down to walk up a hill, let it be ever so steep, or the day ever so hot, unless, indeed, when the driver was afraid I should not manage it. And sometimes I was so feverish and worn that I could hardly touch my food. How I used to long for the nice bran mash with niter in it that Jerry used to give us on Saturday nights in hot weather. It used to cool us down and make us so comfortable. Then we had 2 nights and a whole day for unbroken rest. And on Monday morning we were as fresh as young horses again. But here there was no rest, and my driver was just as hard as his master. He had a cruel whip with something so sharp at the end that it sometimes drew blood, and he would even whip me under the belly and flip the lash out at my head. Indignities like these took the heart out of me terribly. But still I did my best and never hung back, for, as poor Ginger said, it was no use. Men are the strongest. One day I went on the stand at 8 in the morning and had done a good share of work when we had to take a fare to the railway. A long train was just expected in, so my driver pulled up at the back of some of the outside cabs to take the chance of a return fare. It was a very heavy train, and as all the cabs were soon engaged, ours was called for. There was a party of 4, a noisy, blustering man, with a lady, a little boy, and a young girl, and a great deal of luggage. The lady and the boy got into the cab, and while the man ordered about the luggage, the young girl came and looked at me. "Papa," she said, "I'm sure this poor horse cannot take us and all our luggage so far. He's so very weak and worn out. Do look at him." "Oh, he's all right, miss," said my driver. "He's strong enough." The porter, who was pulling about some heavy boxes, suggested to the gentleman, as there was so much luggage, whether he would not take a second cab. "Can your horse do it, or can't he?" said the blustering man to my driver. "Oh, he can do it all right, sir. Send up the boxes, porter. He can take more than that." And he helped to haul up a box so heavy that I could feel the springs go down. Papa, do take a second cab," said the young girl in a beseeching tone. "I'm sure we are wrong. I'm sure it is very cruel." "Oh, nonsense, Grace. Get in at once. Don't make all this fuss. A pretty thing it would be if a man of business had to examine every cab horse before he hired it. The man knows his own business, of course. There, get in and hold your tongue." My gentle friend had to obey, and box after box was dragged up and lodged on the top of the cab or settled by the side of the driver. At last all was ready, and with his usual jerk at the rein and slash of the whip, he drove out of the station. The load was very heavy, and I had had neither food nor rest since the morning. But I did my best, as I always had done, in spite of cruelty and injustice. I got along fairly till we came to Ludgate Hill, but there the heavy load and my own exhaustion were too much. I was struggling to keep on, goaded by constant chucks of the rein and use of the whip, when, in a single moment, I cannot tell how, my feet slipped from under me, and I fell heavily to the ground on my side. The suddenness and the force with which I fell seemed to beat all the breath out of my body. I lay perfectly still. Indeed, I had no power to move, and I thought now I was going to die. I heard a sort of confusion round me, loud, angry voices, and the getting down of the luggage, but it was all like a dream. I thought I heard that sweet, pitiful voice saying, "Oh, that poor horse! It is all our fault." Someone came and loosened the throat strap of my bridle and undid the traces which kept the collar so tight upon me. Someone said, "He's dead, he'll never get up again." Then I could hear a policeman giving orders, but I did not even open my eyes. I could only draw a gasping breath now and then. Some cold water was thrown over my head, and some cordial poured into my mouth, and something was covered over me. I cannot tell how long I lay there, but I found my life coming back, and a kind-voiced man was patting me and encouraging me to rise. After some more cordial had been given me, and after one or two attempts, I staggered to my feet and was gently led to some stables which were close by. Here I was put into a well-littered stall, and some warm gruel was brought to me, which I drank gratefully. In the evening I was sufficiently recovered to be led back to Skinner's stables, where I think they did the best for me they could. In the morning Skinner came with a farrier to look at me. He examined me very closely and said, "This is a case of overwork more than disease. If you could give him a run off for 6 months, he would be able to work again. But now there is not an ounce of strength in him." "And he must just go to the dogs," said Skinner. "I have no meadows to nurse sick horses in. He might get well or he might not. That sort of thing don't suit my business. My plan's to work 'em as long as they'll go, and then sell 'em for what they'll fetch, at the knackers or elsewhere." "But if he was broken-winded," said the farrier, "you'd better have him killed out of hand. But he's not. There's a sale of horses coming off in about 10 days. If you rest him and feed him up, he may pick up. And you may get more than his skin is worth, at any rate."
Nicholas Skinner takes this advice, and after a few days' rest, Black Beauty is sold yet again, but this time to a kind farmer out in the country, who gives the horse a long period for recuperation, and then sells him to 3 ladies.
In the morning, a smart-looking young man came for me. At first he looked pleased, but when he saw my knees, he said in a disappointed voice, "I didn't think, sir, you'd have recommended my ladies a blemished horse like that." "Handsome is that handsome does," said my master. "You're only taking him on trial, and I'm sure you'll do fairly by him, young man, and if he's not as safe as any horse you ever drove, send him back." I was led home, placed in a comfortable stable, fed, and left to myself. The next day, when my groom was cleaning my face, he said, "That's just like the star that Black Beauty had. He's much the same height, too. I wonder where he is now." A little further on, he came to the place in my neck where I was bled and where a little knot was left in the skin. He almost started and began to look me over carefully, talking to himself. "White star in the forehead, one white foot on the offside, this little knot just in that place." Then, looking at the middle of my back, "And as I'm alive, there's that little patch of white hair that John used to call Beauty's threepenny bit. It must be Black Beauty. Why, Beauty, Beauty, do you know me? Little Joe Green, the stable lad at Birtwick Park." And he began patting and patting me as if he was quite overjoyed. I could not say that I remembered him, for now he was a fine-grown young fellow with black whiskers and a man's voice, but I was sure he knew me, and that he was Joe Green, and I was very glad. I put my nose up to him and tried to say that we were friends. I never saw a man so pleased. "Give you a fair trial? I should think so indeed. I wonder who the rascal was that broke your knees, my old Beauty. You must have been badly served out somewhere. Well, well, it won't be my fault if you're having good times of it now." In the afternoon, I was put into a low park chair and brought to the door. Miss Ellen was going to try me, and Green went with her. I soon found that she was a good driver, and she seemed pleased with my paces. I heard Joe telling her about me, and that he was sure I was Squire Gordon's old Black Beauty. When we returned, the other sisters came out to hear how I had behaved myself. She told them what she had just heard, and said, "I shall certainly write to Mrs. Gordon and tell her that her favourite horse has come to us. How pleased she will be." After this I was driven every day for a week or so, and as I appeared to be quite safe, Miss Lavinia at last ventured out in the small, close carriage. After this, it was quite decided to keep me and call me by my old name of Black Beauty. I have now lived in this happy place a whole year. Joe is the best and kindest of grooms. My work is easy and pleasant, and I feel my strength and spirits all coming back again. My ladies have promised that I shall never be sold, and so I have nothing to fear. And here my story ends. My troubles are all over, and I am at home. And often, before I am quite awake, I fancy I am still in the orchard at Birtwick, standing with my old friends under the apple trees.